Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. It is a true pleasure to welcome you at the Netherlands Institute at Athens for this very special event. A double book presentation of Νέα Ζωή, Έλληνες Εβραίοι μετά τη Shoah, Ιστορία, Μνήμη, Ταυτότητα 1944-1955 by Eleni Beze that has been published recently by Agra Publishers, and of Homecoming, Holocaust Survivors in Greece 1941-1946 by Kateřina Kralova, which is published by Brandeis Publishers and is expected to reach the bookshops in April. Both books deal with a subject that still holds many unheard stories, that of the return of the Jews to their Greek homes after the horrors of the Shoah, survivors of the death camps, people who joined the Greek resistance movement in the mountains, people who found refuge in hiding. Upon returning to the place that they considered home, all were faced with the destruction of their pre-war lives. Amidst the loss of family, social networks, and assets, they had to look for a new life, either in Greece or in Israel or in other parts of the world. The pleasure of hosting this specific event here at the NIA becomes even greater when we take into account that it follows 2 days of intensive and fruitful academic debate which took place in the framework of the international conference Jewish Urban Landscapes in Mid-20th Century that was co-organized by the NIA, the University of Amsterdam, and the workshop on the study of the Jews of Greece. This conference, which was hosted in the very same hall where tonight's book presentation takes place, gathered junior and senior researchers from all over Europe and from the United States. I am very happy to see the artist Artemis Alcalay in our midst, who created the beautiful cover of Kateřina Králova's book and allowed us to use one of her works as logo for the conference. Thank you very much, dear Artemis, for your continuous support towards the Institute and our activities. In absence of co-moderator Anna Maria Drumbuki, who unfortunately had to cancel her participation due to the flu, tonight's event will be coordinated and moderated exclusively by our dear friend and founding member of the workshop on the study of the Jews in Greece, Philip Carabot, with whom we have had the pleasure of cooperating on various occasions in the past. Our event will consist of a presentation of both books by the respective authors, followed by reflection by Philip Carabot, after which the floor will be open for questions from the audience. Although the presentations and reflections will be in English, during the Q&A session, also Greek may be used in order to accommodate as many people as possible. Thank you for your attention. I now have the pleasure of introducing the first speaker of the evening, Kateřina Králova, who is a professor of contemporary history and a memory studies scholar at Charles University in Prague and the Czech Academy of Sciences. As the head of the Research Center for Memory Studies, she specializes in modern history with a focus on Nazi persecution and Holocaust studies. Kateřina has been awarded prestigious fellowships, including those from the Humboldt Foundation and the Fulbright Commission. Her scholarly contributions include the monograph on Greek-German relations, Στη σκιά της κατοχής, οι Έλληνο-Γερμανικές σχέσεις την περίοδο 1940-2010, in Greek 2013 and in German published in 2016, the co-edited volume Diverse Perspectives on Jewish Life in Southeast Europe, published by Routledge in 2019, and guest-edited special issues such as Troubled Pasts and Memory Politics in Central and Southeastern Europe, and Mass Atrocities in Southeast Europe, History and Memory of World War II and its Aftermath. Kateřina, can you please take the floor? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willem, for the very kind introduction. Thank you for hosting this talk, and thank you for the past wonderful 2 days with the conference. It's always a great pleasure to be a guest at NIA, and it's always a pleasure to be back in Athens. Well, I was thinking of framing the story of how it comes that I do what I do, which I'm usually being asked by people, and the story has been told many times, but you will be the first one to have it with some pictures and getting more the complex story of my research on Greece. I came to Thessaloniki in 2004 with scholarship of the State Foundation of Greece with IKI as a PhD student. And back then, my plan was already to write my PhD thesis on the Greek-German relations. And a part of it was also, of course, the Jewish story. And walking through Thessaloniki, where back then there were very few traces except of the museum and of the monument on the Square of Liberation, which I always wondered, how can a square be named Place of Liberation when we know the Jewish story of forced labor and everything what was happening there. And then I started to dig deeper down. I was at Xeni. I did a year at the Aristotle University to learn Greek, to do my research. And from Xeni, I became a Czecha, and I'm very proud of it. The Czech one, the Czech girl, coming regularly to Greece, to different places and towns, and having my kuveddes with whoever is ready to speak to me. And I have to admit that the Jewish Museum of Greece and Zanet and many other people here in the room, and hopefully some people who can join us online, were among those who helped me on the very interesting path, which now concluded with a book coming out, but which is far not over yet, I hope. My relationship to Greece is deep, and it will stay deep. However, I have no Greek roots, which may be a surprise for many of you, because when I started to come to Greece as Kateřina, because the Czech pronunciation of Kateřina is something nobody in any other country would dare to say, I was mostly labeled as the third generation of the Greek Civil War refugees in Czechoslovakia. I have nothing to do with them, but I have to do with the story, and I will share it with you.
Kuleshova Albina, born 1898, deported to Thessaly, survived.
Shimon Lederer, born 1859, died 2nd November 1942 in Kutlica.
Ledererova Hermina, born 1904, deported to Thessaly, Auschwitz, murdered.
Lederer Emil, born 1889, Terezín, Auschwitz, Dachau, murdered.
Ledererova Maria, born 1893, Terezín, Auschwitz, murdered.
Ledererova Alžběta, born 1926, Terezín, Auschwitz, survived.
Lederer Oskar, born 1901, Terezín, Auschwitz, Dachau, murdered.
Ledererova Marta, born 1910, Terezín, Auschwitz, murdered.
Glazerova Anna, born 1895, Terezín, Izbica, murdered.
Well, you just met my family. The Kateřina in Ashkenazim tradition can be very good a Jewish name. And that was my family and the story I heard ever since I was a child. because my grandmother survived in hiding, and so did her sisters. Her aunt Hermina didn't. That's the name of my daughter today. And that's the only one who is sort of bringing the story of that part of a family to the ground of Czech Republic. When we recorded this for the Yom HaShoah, for reading of the names with my daughter during the COVID times, she was the same age as my grandmother when she was in hiding. When the COVID was over, my grandmother passed away, and that was exactly the time when my daughter was at the age when the war was over for my grandmother. And that was exactly the time when I got the contract with Brandeis University Press. My grandmother was accompanying me all the time through my Greek adventures and through the story of Greek Jewry and Jews of Greece, of many communities. And we were discussing her small community, which nobody knows of, in Putzwitza. And that maybe also triggered my interest not to do just the community which is so famous in Greece and in the Greek context, and that's Thessaloniki. Because also in Czech Republic, it's mostly just Prague you hear about, starting from Kafka up to whomever, or maybe starting with Golem and with Rabbi Löw in much earlier centuries. I was thinking there are more Jews and more Jewish survivors all over the country, and there are more trajectories we need to map. So I decided, and I dared, to somehow map all the communities of Greece and to give a voice to each and every place where Jews were living and where survivors tried to return. My book is, of course, about the Holocaust, but the Holocaust is not just a simple history. It's not just reading archives. It's about our days, which we still remember through our family members, which are re-narrated to us, and which we narrate to our children as we do at home. And it's also not only a story of one place. So if I am saying the story of Jews of Greece, I'm also saying the story of all other places in occupied Europe where Jewish communities were destroyed, where people were deported, and where the Jewish life disappeared in a sense as it was before the Nazi persecution of Jews. But there is a life after the war. And that is always the bright light at the end of the tunnel. And even after the biggest catastrophes, the people are trying to re-establish their life, be it at home or deciding to move out of the country. Still, the country where they grew up when they were small or young remains very deep in their hearts, and is re-narrated in any continents of the world that we can imagine, and that's also part of the story. So when I think about homecoming, I was wondering what time, how to place that moment in time. Is it the time when the Germans are leaving Greece? Is it the time when the camps are liberated? Is it the time when the last survivor is coming back to Greece? My answer is no. The homecoming starts with the persecution, because exactly at that moment, when you have to leave your home, or you are deported if you haven't left soon enough, you are already decided that you will go home. And you are just seeking for the moment of the homecoming. You have your expectations and your wishes in how it will look like when you come home. And then you are facing the reality after something which nobody expected. That would be the whole story, maybe, if it wouldn't be for remembering, thanks to the technologies we have in the past 20 years, everything of it with much distance. So as you know from the Jewish Museum of Greece and from many other places and collections, most of the memories were collected, if very early in the United States in the late 80s. It means that those people went through a very different life sections and periods, which are all connected and collected in their stories. So that's a part of the story as well. How we remember what was the dark times of our life and what was the reconstruction of ourselves, our lives, our communities, our networks, which did not exist and couldn't exist anymore in the form as they were before. Again, you may wonder, and this story which I transmitted from something maybe I never dared in that age to do on my own country, which was too traumatizing and too painful to go into the stories of my own family and those who were murdered. It was so interesting to do that work in another country where I encountered people who were sort of like my grandma. Anyway, this doesn't mean there is no connection at all to Czechoslovakia, and I'm very happy that Mr. Ambassador is here with us as well. Those connections aren't something you expect on the first sight. When I came to Thessaloniki, the first thing and the first person I was introduced to was the family Cuneo. Why? Because Hela Cuneo was from Czechoslovakia, so she was a Czech as well. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to meet her anymore. But speaking with Erika and with Heinz, they were always marveling about how beautiful the holidays in Czechoslovakia were. And they were visiting before the war and after the war. There are more families, apparently, according to the archives, which had mixed marriage Jewish families. I found that 6 Jews of Greece married a woman of Czechoslovakia. However, I unfortunately never found the names. It was just statistics by the countries. There is still a lot to do. And then there are other stories, such as the Matalon sisters, who survived Auschwitz. But at the very end of the war, they were liberated in Theresienstadt, a concentration camp in the vicinity of Prague. Again, their memories are scattered as regards Czechoslovakia or Terezin, because they were found very sick and they needed to be nursed to health again. However, there is a big part of research, maybe in the future, with several dozen of women who passed through Theresienstadt and were Jewesses of Greece. There are other stories as well, such as the one of Modrechaj Kofinas, who as a displaced person came to Prague with other non-Jewish Greeks and just messed around and was taking a look what the future will bring. He stayed from 45 to 50 in Prague to decide after that to go back to Greece and be with the community over here. And incredible stories, because every story is unique and every story is incredible, such as Henri Botton, who was one of the very few who dared to escape the train before it reached Auschwitz. It was somewhere where the photograph of Claire Beze is starting on the top. And he escaped the train and headed to Slovakia to spend the rest of the war in hiding close to Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, on a little farm, playing an Italian soldier who lost his way in Slovakia and then came back to Greece. So you see that even doing a history of Jews of Greece can bring each and every country on the map, and we will return to that while I talk. And coming back to the Levy family, it was not only to the Levy family and to the Cuneo family. It was not only Hela Levy who married Salvador Cuneo, who came here. Once the Nazi occupation threatened already Czechoslovakia, and the anti-Jewish measures were coming and installed in the country, her parents left as well. Her mother Tessa, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for her, because otherwise she would have been deported, passed away before the war. And her father stayed here, and he was having letter exchange with his cousin in Prague, Maria Barre, which was published in this beautiful book, and is giving some of his views on how Thessaloniki before the war was. As I said, Erika and Heinz, the two children of Hela and Salvador, were not only going for holidays to the parents in Carlsbad before the war, they were also visiting Carlsbad after the war. This may be the last picture of them together in Carlsbad 2001, which is also in Erika's book, published 2 years after she died, in an edition, I don't know, third edition maybe, and 2 years before her husband, Raleigh, who was helping her to translate the book into German, etc., passed away as well. All of those connections are very precious to me, and I'm very lucky and honored that I was able to do the research in the times when all those people were still around us. But the Cuneo family also shows us very well, with 4 survivors of Auschwitz, how rich the materials on Jewish survivors may be in one single family. So what did I find and what did I work on? And I worked on about over 100 families in the book, and about 1,000 testimonies in form of memoirs, oral histories, diaries, oral histories from all possible archives that you can imagine. Only for them, you would have not only the archival records and the interviews, which are in many collections. You would have also the memoirs that they have written and that they adjusted a little bit in every language and every translation. You can see how important it is that the translations are often being made in cooperation with family members who are very sensible to the story. But as a historian and memory scholar, you come into the logic of what do they want to say to whom? And that's very interesting as well. So when I'm speaking about 1,000 testimonies, I'm not speaking about 1,000 people, because for some of those people, there were several testimonies and memoirs that I was working on one specific case. Still, as I said, there are over 100 families covered in that book. And I am very sorry I couldn't cover everyone. These are just for your imagination, the sources I was working with archival sources unpublished, with testimonies and with newspapers, which are very often bringing the story not only of the time after the war, Chronika, which started to be issued much later, but they are bringing the stories of the past as well. So you get and collect bits and pieces, and then you make together a one big puzzle coming into a great picture. As for my book, the book is divided in 4 core chapters, and it is also covering a timeline, because if we are speaking about the return, which as I am claiming is starting already with the first anti-Jewish measures, but also continuing with the first people who can come out and live their life and start to live their lives again without anti-Jewish measures. We start with the hiding. The hiding may have been the first thing which came to somebody's mind. And very often, many of the trajectories, in fact, started with negotiations of hiding, which then may have gone wrong. It's covering, again, all the map. And these people, very few hiding in Thessaloniki, such as the Pardo family, and Rosina Pardo is actually somebody who on a theoretical or conceptual level is also suggesting a connection between Greece and Netherlands, because we are at Nia, and that's her being called the Anne Frank of Greece. While Anne Frank did not survive, Rosina managed to survive and delivered her testimonies both in books, in interviews, and in movies. But they were hiding much more often in Athens, which became the center of the hiding story in the cities. And this brings people from all possible communities to one place, which wasn't the stronghold of a Jewish community, such as we see in case of Thessaloniki, Yanina, Corfu, Kavala. However, if the members, for example, of Kavala survived, they most often survived in hiding in Athens. We went to mountains, and we have heard during our seminars multiple times that not, and during our visit of the Jewish Museum as well, that mountains wasn't just a place for fighters. It also provided a place to be safe and not to have an arm in your hands. That's part of the story. Maybe in the same family, one was fighting and another one was hidden in a safe place in the mountains. And that all comes together. And on the islands, which were a place of hiding of several Jews, including Jews of Thessaloniki and other places. My second chapter, which connects, is the other group of those who were internally displaced, as were those in hiding. So I regard every form of survivorship as displacement and forced displacement, because either you were forced in hiding or you were forced to do something else, taking the arms, or you were forced to emigrate. And if you didn't do anything of that, you were forcefully deported to camps. So all of them are forced displacements. However, those in the displaced internally, they come and start to rebuild the community much earlier. And much earlier is again the fine tune of what time means in post-war, in the aftermath. Whereas in our life, maybe a year or two doesn't mean much. Here, day by day means a lot. And if you are waiting for those returning from the camps for a year, it's a really long time in your perception. So also these dynamics of time are something I try to cover in my book. For armed resistance, I covered both those who were fighting here in Greece, but also those who crossed the Mediterranean and were fighting with armies in exile or with British army together. And we're actually coming back to Greece much later than many would expect, because they stuck somewhere on the way, be it in Egypt or be it in Italy, or were transferred to Britain, and only from Britain they came back to Greece. So all of those stories have a very long time dynamic, somewhere between autumn, October 44, up to summer 45 and autumn 45. And I am also covering those few cases of the Jews of Greece who survived being caught and imprisoned, but not as Jews, as prisoners of war. The biggest chapter in my book is the chapter on camps, which is divided into 3 big chapters. Treblinka, where nobody survived, but those who managed to go into hiding, or who fought with the partisans, or those who were pushed on forced labor to Bulgaria, those were still hoping that at least someone must come back from Treblinka. and those expectations that it is impossible that full communities with each and everyone will never return to Greece are also covered in my book. I didn't want to skip that one, and I think it's a very important chapter of the Jewish memory in Greece, which is often not covered. My explanation is because of the language and because of the difficulties to get into Bulgarian sources, which for me, being a Slavic speaker and having still studied Russian at school, was something I could deal with in a way without AI, which is also important to be said. You can see the map of the trajectories of return, and you can again see most of the countries with Netherlands on the map, but not really the return journeys. However, the encountering of Jews of Greece with Jews of Netherlands was very prominent in case of Bergen-Belsen. And I am dealing with that extensively based on sources of survivors from the Jews of Netherlands, who wrote both about the star camp and about the neutral camp, and how they encountering mostly of Jews of Ashkenazi origin, of very different communities, how they were facing for them very exotic community of Sephardim who ended up in the neutral camp. With all of those trajectories, there is really no place, east and west, which wouldn't be covered on the map. And this is very telling, again, for the transnationality of how we regard the story of the Holocaust, even though we are doing a case study on only Greece. The last chapter and the final chapter, and again we go by time, if those in hiding started to appear and rebuild the community already in autumn 44, then weeks or months later, the partisans and the soldiers were reappearing and coming back home. If we speak about the camps, we speak about early 45, when the first started to be able to escape the death marshes and somehow make their way through all Europe back to Greece. But we are going up to 46 with emigration, and most prominently those who managed to escape to British Mandate Palestine. We are speaking again only about 45 and 46, when the war not in Greece but in Europe was over. So only after May those people are getting the right paperwork and are able to return, if they decide so, to Greece. So I am covering the neighboring countries, and that was for me a lesson learned as well in the middle of the refugee crisis, when so many voices were heard. Why don't the people go to the neighboring country? And I was thinking, okay, from my research, that's never easy to go to a neighboring country. Your neighbors mostly don't want you. And this is a prime example of how difficult it is to be saved in a neighboring country, which may be neutral and which would suggest, that's the logical safe harbor, but nobody wants you. So all of those stories are covered in my book, and then there is an afterword about everything happening back in Greece, about the tensions between Jews and non-Jews, but also the tensions between the four categories we have here, given the logic of the looming Cold War and, of course, of the looming civil war in Greece. How important it is to survive, to re-establish yourself as a person, which is far more important than investing into legal claims of the community and so on, because the survivorship and the personal reconstruction is the first thing people wish to do and wish to establish again and bringing a new life. I claim that the end of this journey of the homecoming is colliding with the beginning of the civil war in Greece. As the civil war in Greece begins, we see a lot of emigration from Greece, be it non-Jewish or Jewish. However, the Jewish emigration of Greece, in my eyes, is not because of the Holocaust anymore. It's because of the fear of a new war, which we don't want to be part of. We see the very same thing in Czechoslovakia with the coup d'etat and the change of the regime to communism. The 48 in our case would be a completely new story, starting for everyone in Czechoslovakia, but also for every Jewish survivor. Thank you for your attention. Just a little hint, you can already pre-order the book. The hardcover is a bit too expensive, but I'm happy that the soft cover, the paperback, is on, let's say, reasonable price, and the book will be shipped all over Europe, and I am sure you will find it here in Greece as well. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much, Kateřina, for your intriguing account, also with a very personal touch that was really impressive. And I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to having your book in our hands. I know that at least I am looking forward to that. Our second speaker of tonight is Eleni Beze. She was born in Montpellier in 1974. She is a philologist and historian. She studied at the Department of Philosophical and Social Studies of the University of Crete and at the postgraduate program in philosophy of the same university. She has worked in secondary education and as a publications editor. Since 2010, she has collaborated with the Jewish Museum of Greece. Her doctoral thesis, from which her book that she will present was derived, was entitled Greek Jews, Memories and Identities After World War II, which appeared at the Department of History, Archaeology and Social Anthropology of the University of Thessaly in 2021. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the same department, where she has taught about post-war Jewish life in Greece. She studies and writes about the Shoah and its aftermath, as we will find out right now. Eleni, please.
First of all, I would like to thank the Netherlands Institute and Willem Lederborg personally for inviting me to participate in today's event. Also, Kateřina Kralova, who agreed to co-present our recent books, which have much in common, and Philip Carabot for their valuable contribution to the discussion. In my book, I examined a topic that has only in recent times attracted the interest of historians. By exploring multiple sources, I tried to trace how the memories and identities of Greek Jews were formed in the aftermath of the Shoah. In order to follow these processes, it was necessary to construct different frameworks, national, international, communal, in which attitudes, political stances, dilemmas, choices, and emotions could be understood. More precisely, within a chronological framework which extends from the first days after liberation, October 1944, to the mid-1950s, a period in which the reconstruction of the Jewish communities of Greece was largely completed, I traced individual and collective itineraries, mainly of Jews from Salonika and Athens, but also of some Jews from smaller communities. Among important sources were Jewish archives, interviews, memoirs, essays, as well as literary works written by Greek Jews which had not been thoroughly studied. The use of this material allowed the various voices articulated by Greek Jewry after the war to be heard, and in particular the different attitude it adopted towards critical issues, such as that of immigration to Palestine and then Israel, the conflicts between different groups, but equally the constant call for unity. In particular, the first memoirs, the testimonies published in the Greek and Greek Jewish press shortly after the war, as well as the first interviews given by survivors, allowed me to follow closely how the post-war autobiographical Jewish discourse was formed, to identify the themes that initiated, as well as the emotions that it depicted or possibly stirred. In other words, thanks to this material, the complexity of the Jewish post-war experience was highlighted, primarily as it was experienced, shared, and composed in memory by the subjects themselves, the Greek Jews, something that I believe also contributed to better understanding of the Greek post-war society. In the first part of the book, Greek Jews after liberation, I focused on the period immediately after liberation. A short but dense period of significant events. During the first year, 1944-1945, the return from hiding places, the resistance, the camps, the Middle East and Egypt, of those who had survived was completed. Individuals try, sometimes with more success and sometimes with less, to start their lives from the beginning. At the same time, the first collective reconstruction efforts are taking place in Athens and Salonika, but also in the smaller communities. In the second chapter of the first part, titled The First Testimonies, the Construction of an Early Narrative, I followed the birth and evolution of the post-war Greek Jewish autobiographical discourse. The publications examined offer a representative picture of the main, often recurrent topics, the rhetorical modes employed, composing a first stereotypical narrative, the stances adopted by the journalists, and of how the political orientation of the newspapers determined the angle through which the survivors' narratives were presented. I also analyzed closely the books In Memoriam by Rabbi Michael Molcho and Joseph Nehama, and by Isaac Matarasso, And Yet They All Did Not Die, which are both documentation works and testimonies, emphasizing their second quality. Finally, I approached two literary texts, Le Faubourg d'Athènes, The Suburbs of Athens by Maurice Politi, and El Secreto del Mudo, The Secret of the Mute by Isaac Ben-Rubi, the only ones written in the aftermath of the war by Greek Jews. The analysis of the discourse of the subjects, the issues that concern them as authors, the literary means they employ to express themselves, and of course the issue of the Shoah and how it is reflected in the above texts, or implicitly runs through them, were the main questions I tried to answer. The second part of the book is dedicated to the ideological Jewish identities emerging in the post-war era. In the first chapter of this part, entitled Greek Jews and Zionists, Stances and Persons, I traced manifestations of the Zionist ideology both in discourse and in actions. In the last chapter of the book, entitled Greek Jews and Leftists, Stances and Persons, I attempted to give an overview of the post-war choices of Jews who at some point in their lives, primarily during the occupation but not exclusively, joined the left. What answers did these people give to the dilemmas of the Civil War and post-Civil War era? This book aimed to contribute to the understanding of the post-Shoah era in Greece, an era that begins with the end of the war, but its echo reaches to our days. The study of this particular period, on the one hand, contributes to understanding the Shoah as an event with duration in time. On the other hand, it contributes to a more complete understanding of the post-war civil and post-civil era, as well as the dilemmas and choices of the people who lived in it. Primo Levi reminds us that for the Jews who survived the Shoah, the past is hard to pass, and that justice cannot restore injustice. For the survivors, but often also their descendants, as I am, the Shoah still returns in 1,000 ways and against our will. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon from me as well. I'm speaking from the mic so that people who follow us on Zoom can hear me, otherwise they won't be able to hear us. First of all, thank you very much for joining us at this special event. And I will start with the obvious. Both these two academics and ladies have written fantastic accounts of what could be referred to as homecoming, reconstruction, memory, identity/identities. I've been working with the Jews in Greece for a number of years now, more than a decade, 15 years in actual fact. And I didn't expect when I started working, doing research on the Jews of Greece, that in such a short period of time, we would have so important publications, such as the two publications that we will be discussing today. We are discussing today. Now, this event was meant to be moderated, not only by me, but by my friend and colleague Anna Maria Zombuki, who unfortunately cannot join us because she has influenza. But she has kindly written a number of questions or themes addressed particularly to Kateřina and her book Homecoming. The list is rather long, so I won't go. So, yeah. So, of course. Her first point is not exactly, neither of these are exactly questions as such. They're more afterthoughts, thoughts, food for thought, ideas for further discussion. The first one has to do with the role of trauma in oral history. You indirectly referred to this in your very evocative presentation earlier today. And Anna Maria's question is, to what extent do you think there's a kind of self-censorship in these? And whether we as historians or anthropologists are in a position to unearth and reconstruct these silences.
Green. It's green. They are hearing. Of course, wonderful question, wonderful suggestion that I have been working on and looking for methodologies how to overcome this problem. That's why I'm saying my work is not just a historical work. It's a lot of memory work and it's a lot of social sciences as well. Privileged because I'm teaching history on Faculty of Social Sciences and I have people around me who can help me with methodologies and concepts. One of the methodologies that I imposed on my work and on my sources was seeing not only methodologically now, not only each individual, but seeing survivors as a cohort. And when you deal with a cohort, one part of a narrative which can be hidden in an interview given in Greece can be disclosed in an interview given in United States. One which may be overshadowed later in the life can be much more highlighted in the memoirs written after the war. So very similar to Eleni, actually. I was working also with written, let's say, testimonies, which may not consider and may not find even the words because they were not existing yet in the late 40s for what we call today Holocaust. The Holocaust is much later invention, and it comes up and pops out in the interviews in the 90s, of course. But there is a completely different framing if we go into the memoirs of the post-war and if we go into writing of Michael Mulhall and other writings. All of that, if you make connection and compare diachronically and transnationally, brings you to cover those gaps which may be silenced in one generation or one time or another time, one generation or another generation, because very often we have interviews of parents and children, so that's also, or we have memoirs of parents and interviews of children. So you put it all together and you try to do your best. Yes, there is a lot of trauma, but the trauma is being expressed or silenced differently regarding on the time, on the gender, on the country in which you give the interview, on the interviewer and who it is. Is it your friend, a part of your community, or is it somebody who just came in and asked because he or she was doing the research in Canada or South Africa or Australia, or is part of a completely new community, such as the communities of all those countries around the world. So I hope there is a balance, and it was very deep in my mind, and I must say sociological methodology of studying each individual as a part of the cohort helped me a lot.
Excellent, yes, thank you. This was a very interesting response to a very, not provocative, but very crucial question, because much of what both of you have used as sources are kind of what we refer to as testimony, whether oral or written. And now, a follow-up to this, to Anna Maria's question is, it's one of those questions, if you had the opportunity, would you have preferred to interview yourself, survivors?
Oh my God, I wanted to come back to everybody I interviewed, and I didn't manage anymore. I interviewed some of the people, such as Erika Cuneo, for my first book on Greek-German relations. And there were so many things I never asked. But this is the fate of every source. You can never have everything. I don't have all the languages. I can cover Bulgarian. Yes, perfect. I cannot, unfortunately, I can read all German sources. Yes, perfect. I cannot cover Hebrew. So what I did with the Hebrew testimonies, I had a good friend helping me translating. I asked questions and I worked on a certain part of Hebrew testimonies, mostly written testimonies as well. But I definitely couldn't cover them to the extent I can cover Greek testimonies, English testimonies, French testimonies. Spanish or Judeo-Spanish is another problem of mine. I am not good. I can figure out something, but I cannot feel and understand the nuances. So, of course, I have to admit there are gaps. But for other people, it would be German, or it would be Bulgarian, or it would be something else. So it's just a contribution to the research, and there is so much space for others to come.
Yes, well, what I really meant with this question is, if you were able to interview survivors, you yourself, would you have frame the questions differently? Would you have ended up with different accounts which you will later use? It's not a matter of whether you speak Ladino or whether you understand Hebrew. That's not the issue here.
That's what I was trying to say as well. I was lucky enough that when the Jewish Museum of Greece was recording, and we became friends with Alexios Menexiadis, and all of that yielded in doing some of the interviews here. Then I was lucky enough to interview some people in the United States, and those interviews are being catalogized for the collection of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. So again, from the big award, I had some glimpses. I tried. But honestly, if we speak about how I asked them and how I would ask at the end of the book, I was still missing things, and there was no way to go back because of the lifespan we are living, and because the people were not here anymore.
Now, the same question to Eleni concerning the early autobiographical discourse of your survivors. In the cover of the book, back cover of the book, and in the prologue by Professor Benjamin, you said both of you make mention of silences. How have you dealt with the silences of these early written testimonies?
Well,
If the green light is on, it's on.
yes, thank you. Dealing with the silences of sources in general, this is not easy, and sometimes silences are difficult to explain. I actually faced silences in my own family history, and these were the most difficult ones to explain. I didn't try to explain them actually. I just tried to show that some parts of their lives, some decisions the survivors made, cannot be explained today, especially today, that we cannot, talk with them anymore. So sources, archival sources or testimonies give us some answers, but of course they cannot cover everything. But we have to accept this.
Indeed, we have to deal with it, accept it, and indeed. Now, question about which to both of you. Kateřina, in your very evocative presentation, you referred to the Jews of Greece. On the contrary, Eleni, both in the book and her presentation, referred to Greek Jews. Would you care to comment on either of your two choices and explain to us why?
Again, that was a deliberate decision to speak about Jews of Greece, because many of those people who were murdered and those who survived actually had different nationalities, and that's also part of the stories. They were not Greek citizens. They were Spanish citizens, they were Italian citizens, and all of that was incredible part of the story. And again, if you allow me the comparison with Czechoslovakia, can we speak about Czech Jews or Czechoslovak Jews or call them Czech German speaking Jews? No. If they declared the nationality as German before the war, they were expulsed of the country together with the Germans. And the same was happening here before with the Greco-Italian war, where Italian Jews of Italian nationality were put in camps not as Jews, but as Italians, as the occupiers or as the enemies. And the same is the problem of what we see very clearly in German archives, all the debates about compensation of Jews of Greece, where there is a separate category of the Spanish Jews of Greece. They're saying, no, we have an agreement, we are giving money to Greece and Greeks, and those are not Greeks. Yes, they are Jews, but we don't care, you know. So you have all of those deep stories which are so much about the identity or identities you can speak about. And the decision, you cannot do the decision if you are a Jew or not when the Nazis are coming and deporting, neither in Czechoslovakia nor in Greece. When you are back, you still live with being a Holocaust survivor, meaning being a Jew. But will your identity be Greek as well? Or will it be a different one? Will you end up in Greece if you are labeled as an Italian Jew, as happened for several of them? Or will you be trapped in Italy because this is actually your home country? What about if you are returning to Rhodes? What will happen with you? Rhodes is not yet even Greece. So are you a Greek Jew? In my understanding, no. And I wanted to cover all the stories. So therefore, Jews of Greece.
Well, I worked mostly on the post-Shoah period, so things are slightly different compared to this that Kateřina described. I chose to name them Greek Jews because even before and also during and immediately after the Shoah, the Jews of Greece are not only the Jews of the country. Some of them participate in an emerging Greek Jewish identity, which of course is not unique or one-dimensional. That is, it can coexist with other Jewish identities, such as those of the Romaniotes, the Sephardim, or with local identities. Consequently, the Jews of the country, or at least some of those who have left written traces or given interviews, now called themselves Greeks, Greek Jews or Greek Jewish, Eleno-Hebrei. We also know that Greek Jewish survivors often reproduced narratives with a strong national Greek character, such as the uprising in Birkenau on October 7, 1944. These narratives tended to close with a reference to the Greek national anthem, which, as the survivors remembered or had heard by others in the camp, the rebels chanted in the crematorium. Among these narratives, the one written and buried near the crematoria by Salonical Marcel Najeri stands out. In this, as it is known, Najeri testifies to his Greek identity. I would like also to add that the term Greek Jews is used after the Shoah both by the Jewish press, such as Israeli Konvima, and by the Greek non-Jewish press. It is certainly a fluid term, which is reconfigured in each context, and possibly meets with resistance. However, it is a term in use, and most importantly, a term used by the subjects themselves. This is the reason why I included it in the title of the book. After all, this is a book that studies exactly that, the various manifestations of Greek Jewish identities.
Okay, thank you. Allow me, however, to disagree as far as the until the late 1950s, the Central Group referred to Hebraismos as Eladas, not Ελληνικός Hebraismos. Anyway, this is a long disagreement the two of us have. It's a long way back, so we won't go into that. Yes, thank you. I think one final question to the pair of you, and then we can open the floor for discussion. And so there are people who inform those who follow us in Zoom that if they have any questions or comments, they can certainly make it. It's the same question to the pair of you. What next? In terms of, do you think you have exhausted your chosen subject matter?
Well, I think there are, if you are creating a book, it's something else than creating an article. You are taking a big topic. My topic started somehow, somewhere with my outrage that there is no anti-Semitism in Greece when I was hearing everything Chrysiavi was doing and so on. And I was thinking I will bring it up to the early 21st century, and then I was cutting down. I was thinking about end of junta, beginning of junta, end of civil war, end of the actual physical presence of American Joint Distribution Committee on Greek ground. And as you see, with all of that, I ended up with the beginning of the Greek Civil War. And those 2 years were easily covering a full book, and I'm very happy I did the decision. So there are definitely bits and pieces after the time I covered that I would like to elaborate on in articles, maybe a book. It is the question if it will be the next step will be a topic again about Jews in Greece. If I will move back to the Greek Civil War refugees in Czechoslovakia, because all of those aftermath nuances, the migration and mobility and displacement because of a war, is giving you a lot if you jump from one topic to another, and it's very revealing. So I will be staying with Greece somehow. I don't know how exactly. There will be some more articles. I definitely want to dig down into archives in Czech Republic covering those stories of the displaced Greeks who appeared in Prague, about the cohort of Jewish women of Greece liberated at Terezin. So these are article things. But the most important task ahead of me is that I really wish that in a year or two, this book appears in Greek as well. And all of those who are covered somehow in a book, maybe by name, maybe by some relative of a family, maybe just as an idea of what it was, will be able to read it in their native tongue.
Is your Greek publisher here?
There is not yet a Greek publisher, so I hope.
A Greek publisher you have worked with in the past, but you're thinking about.
I'm definitely thinking about Alexandria, who published my first 2 books, but I am open to other publishing houses as well. So let's see where I'm most successful, because I know translation is a big thing. Buying a book from an American press is a big thing as well, and I will have to fundraise, I believe.
Well, your ambassador is here.
My ambassador already said that I have all his support and his auspice, so we will definitely see how we manage. And your ambassador in Prague, the Greek ambassador in Prague, is another person who is very interested in the topic and very supportive, so I'm very lucky.
Thank you very much for your response. Just an afterthought. Now, I remember during the COVID year we had a couple of conversations via WhatsApp or Zoom, and I had got the idea at the time, the impression that you were working on the early post-Shoah era. And instead we have this excellent book which ends exactly at the early post-Shoah era. So your sources, your ideas, your your line of thinking took you back in terms of the chronological area, which is fascinating. Eleni?
Well, of course, there is much to do. What has already surprised me is that many people who have already read the book wanted to share their families, their parents' stories or their own stories. So one thing I should have is to try to, let's say, publish parts of these stories to complete the stories I already have presented in the book. And if I have the time, I would also like to work on the year 1945 and focus only on this year after the war, and examine not only the Jewish experience, the coming back of the survivors, but also the coming back of all the let's say hostages, from the concentration camps in Greece. And it's also, of course, the beginning of the Civil War, as we know. So I think it's a very dense period, and I think there is some research to do in this area.
Excellent, yes, I think so. What you have in mind in doing it's fascinating, and it's going to work out just fine. Not only because there's a lot of material, but you can even kind of cover a historiographical level in the. Now, New Life, and I will end with that. Nezoi, the title or subtitle of your book, and you have this. I take it this is the title taken from this advertisement of the Israeli Kobima.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like putting faces to names. So here is your Israeli Haskell Najari.
Mm-hmm.
Property Declaration Salonika 1943. Israel was married with 2 young children. His Martha was born in 1942. His wife Zafira and their 2 children, of course, were murdered. On the right there is the signature of Israel. Like in the post, in the early post-Shoah era, so in 1943, before the persecution, he was a barber. But like many other survivors, particularly Salonican Jews, he migrated, he left. Migrated in 1951, 1952 to the States. Okay. Now, the floor is open for questions, points. Nothing from Zoom, okay?
Thank you for this wonderful presentation of a very, very important book. I wonder if there were a common thread through all these stories. If these people who were sort of depositing to you their stories were asking for something, for asking for justice, just to have do some good to the world, some good to come out of it, out of such terrible experience. As they were, what is your sense out of why did they want to tell you their stories? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Very important question, and we can approach it in many ways. what they said or did not say, why they wrote what they did or didn't, and what was the incentive of the whole process. And this is, in my understanding, connecting them all. The survivorship to survive. And I write in the introduction of my book that there were those who didn't want to survive. When they saw what is coming upon them, they decided this is not for living. But since I am working on survivors, I am not covering those stories. It would be an excellent research as well, covering those who didn't find the energy and who decided consciously not to go through all the ordeal. We know stories, and not only of Jews of Greece, but also of many other countries, where a mother is leaving her daughter in the camp and running against the electrified barbed wire, because she decided this is not anymore for living. And the daughter is then testifying. She tried to persuade me, that's a Hungarian testimony, to do the same. Again, with cohorts, we can suspect this was not only the Jews of Hungary. It was something where you resist so much that it doesn't make sense to go through everything anymore. And there were many who, quote unquote, succeeded not to go ahead anymore. What connects my stories is the wish and willingness to survive. Again, this of course had also many of those Jews who did not survive. Also, they wished with deep down in the heart and for everybody else to make it, but they didn't because they were murdered in one or the other way. Those stories are again partially covered in the book because they are narrated by those who made it. So this willingness to survive and this expectation of survivorship and what it will bring, and that the expectations of returning back to my home in the way I knew it before the war is a completely false and broken expectation, because you cannot go back in time. You cannot get back your age. You cannot get back your community, but this is nourishing the survivorship. And that's the beauty of getting the strength to survive, because you are nourished by this, even if false expectation.
I actually interviewed very few people. Some of them lived in Greece, some of them lived in Israel. Actually, that was part of an initiative of the Jewish Museum of Greece to interview also the Greek immigrants in Israel. Well, people testify for many reasons. I think one of them is that the act of sharing their personal stories or their family stories is an act of survival. And we also should have in mind that they don't only testify for themselves, they mostly testify for those who didn't survive, who didn't make it. Actually, Primo Levi writes beautifully about that. What Kateřina mentioned it before, that actually who the interviewer is plays a great role. And of course, the framework, time, everything affects the interview. I was lucky to be considered part of the Jewish community. That changed everything. That made things more easier, and But sometimes people didn't talk about things they thought I already knew about. So when we work with testimonies, we have to have in mind all these factors.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Oh, okay.
I was wondering, upon leaving the situation that found the survivors at the end of the Shoah, either up in the mountains, either leaving the concentration camp, either returning from refuge, they basically had one choice, which was either going home, back to the place, to their community, or home in Israel, if they consider that home, or to go somewhere else. Do you have any indications of what influenced that decision? Is there, for instance, a relation with the amount of family members maybe that managed to survive? Can you say that people who were left totally alone decided to go back or to leave? When there are more people surviving, do they decide to return or to leave? Is there a correlation between the decisions of others influencing the decision of the individual? I was having Eleni specifically in mind when asking the question. So, yeah.
Well, half of the survivors, Greek survivors, decided to leave. This is a fact. Many factors were taken into consideration. Of course, the situation in Greece after the war, the civil war, the poverty, the fact that many of them didn't manage to take their properties back. And of course, as you said, people who had lost all their families, they considered living much more often and easily. And we should also have in mind that the Greek state facilitated the Jewish immigration in Israel. That played a huge role, I think, in their decision. The men were exempted from the army, and they could travel along with all their family and live for Israel. And also Zionism plays a big role, of course. So that we can't say that people live for only one reason. There are several reasons, and it's not only a Greek Jewish phenomenon that it concerns all the Jews of Europe. So yes, half of them decided to leave.
Maybe I would add to that, what I see a lot is networks and accessibility of the country. So if we think about how many people, Jewish and non-Jewish, would like to leave after the World War II, during the Civil War to the United States, that would be a bunch of them. And we know from the DP camps in Europe that they changed their mind for Israel, for example, or even Palestine before that, because of the accessibility. So it was the networks they had and the accessibility of the country. Will I spend another many years waiting for my dream country, or will I take the only or the first possibility I have if I want to move out of a country. So that was, in my opinion, very important.
Yes, and some of them left for Israel, and then when they had the chance, they moved to the US.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. William, I think your question was very interesting. Allow me to say on the issue of migration, be to the British Mandate Palestine, the state of Israel, or in the 50s in the US, we have to prioritize. It's not something that happens. The conditions are not the same in 1945, 1946, when we have the first 4 or 5 small boats, kayaks, illegal migrants to British Mandate Palestine. The conditions in 1949, September 1949, when the military phase of the Greek Civil War had come to an end, and the government itself became that every Greek citizen of the Jewish faith can leave, irrespective of whether he had done his military service, as long as he renounced his Greek citizenship. So this is 1949. Most of those who went to the state of Israel migrated from the second half of 1949 onwards. And of course, migration to the States is easier said than done. There were certain laws that the US had to put in place, starting in 1951. So migration, or deciding to leave home, it's not a static phenomenon. It's been looked critically and over a period of at least 5 or 10 years.
And then it's also interesting to see, again, the expectations, not only how I will live as a survivor, but how my children will live. Maybe I re-establish myself here, but I wish my children will live elsewhere very often in the state of Israel. Very interesting in this sense is the note or the short interview published in Miriam Novich's book with Hela Cuneo. And Madame Cuneo, as Novich is calling her, is saying, we are staying here. I'm not going to Czechoslovakia or whatever. And we, of course, know it's in the middle of the Cold War, and things are again very different and in those countries, or in this and our country. But my children are getting ready and they leave to Israel. And with this one sentence, she is finishing, and we all know that Heinz and Erika stayed forever after here in Greece. So her expectation was like, this is happening tomorrow. My kids are going, they learn the language, they leave the country. And it was said as a fact. You would say, okay, so they left, and then you have a completely different story.
It's a great pleasure and indeed honor to have him on as a survivor of this one. Mr. Rafael Moises, I was wondering whether you'd like to say a few words on any issue, be it the issue of migration. Thank you.
It's very nice to be here, and very happy to be present and listen to these extremely interesting presentations about the one book. At least I know. The second, I hope to have the opportunity. About the choice of returning or not returning, this discussion seems to appear as though the people who survived had the choice to go to the train station and buy a ticket to here or to there, or to book a plane ticket to here or to there. The stories of returning after survival, at least to Greece, some of them were incredible. The things that people had to go through in order to finally find their place of destination. And I wonder whether anybody has spent special attention and time to consider this situation under the extremely disorganized transportation facilities. Some areas being liberated, some areas still under warfare. How these people made it back to whatever. I think this would be a fascinating research topic, perhaps of interest.
Thank you very much. Any care to comment or express a view on what Moses just said?
First of all, thank you for your reaction, and thank you for sharing with us. Yes, of course, people landed in places they didn't want to. They stuck there. Then they moved to a completely other part of the map. Sometimes they were disoriented. Sometimes the railways did not go the place they wanted to go. They were going east and west between Soviet army and Western liberators, just on a laissez-passer, and then back again. It's also fascinating to see that some of the camp survivors or the extermination camp survivors were found in a stand of physical stand that didn't allow them to move, where others somehow miraculously collected all the energy for return, and then they collapsed on the way. So it looks like a very straightforward research. We go through the woods and we do whatever, and then all the energy is over and they end up somewhere in Germany or in Chernivtsi in Ukraine, or and not just because they cut them for the papers and for the liberation armies, but also for the physical shape of those people who at some moment couldn't do that anymore. And then it takes weeks or months, and then they move again and come to an unexpected destination, are recruited for Hashkarot in Italy, make a decision that, or get a telegram through the Red Cross that somebody survived at home, leave the Hashkara, go back to Greece, and so on and so on. So it's not a straightforward process, but this wish to survive and to come home, whatever the home means, is something which is very deep in their mind. And of course, the nationality and how people are being categorized by the liberating armies is crucial for those who are returning from camps. You are not categorized, and we know it even better than from Greece. And of course, Rika Ben-Veniste is writing a little bit about it for the DPs of Thessaloniki in German. But the hundreds / several thousands, not like many, but many in regard of how many actually survived, of Jews of Poland, they are being labeled as Poles. And the Poles hate them. They hate them in the camps where they try to leave as well, Europe or whatever. And those clashes, the identity imposed on them, and that brings us back to Jews of Greece or Greek Jews, or how we categorize, and I play with it a little bit as well. It's not giving them a choice very often, and then they make the other choice. And if they succeed, that's another thing. Maybe the next choice or the choice after that would be the one which will bring them to another destination. It's fascinating. And it makes us to think a lot about current refugee crisis, about current wars, about people leaving Ukraine, and what will be the next step. We are hosting 500,000 of Ukrainians right now. What will be their next steps? Will they return home? Will there be a homecoming? And what will be considering home if they return in 5 years, for example, and their kids are going to Czech schools and being at home somewhere else? So all those questions are also depicted in the big story of the Holocaust.
Yes. I just wanted to add that something we tend to forget in Greece when we deal with the Holocaust, and I wanted to to stress in my book as well is that the liberation does not take place in a moment. It's a very long process. For many people, it's an adventure, and thousands lost their lives during this process of return. So interviews also in the 90s tended to end with the liberation, as if life started from scratch immediately after that, which is not true. On the contrary, the first survivors who came back in Greece and gave their testimonies to journalists, because journalists were interested in these people, talked to them, and the journalists wrote much about this adventure of coming back home. So it's very important to study these first accounts. And I try to focus also on this aspect in my book. And of course, I will refer once again to Primo Levi and his book The Truth, which is also, there is also a film based on this book, which is about his journey back home, which took months actually. Yes. And there is a very significant moment in the movie when the Soviet army arrives at Auschwitz, and they look at the camp without knowing what this is, because we now know that the camp was not liberated, as we say. They found the camp accidentally. And the prisoners who are left behind, the sick people who are left behind, they are looking at them and they are trying to get out of the camp. But the soldiers make a sign to them, saying to them, go back in. So they were once again imprisoned. So yes, it was not a moment, liberation.
Yes. With the Greek Jews that went to Israel, were there any who came back afterwards? I mean, first going to Israel and then coming back. Was there such a case?
This is a difficult question.
Why?
Because it's quite a taboo question. Of course, there were people who came back, or people who immigrated to other countries such as the US. But for the Israeli society of the 1950s, let's say, or the 1960s, leaving Israel was like betraying the country, the Jewish country. So yes, there were people who came back, but that was not an easy decision.
If I may add on this question of yours, at least Jews from Athens who left and went to British Mandate Palestine in 1945 and 1946. Only 3 returned to Athens in the 1950s, out of, I would say, more than 1,000. So it's a very, very, very tiny percentage. On the other issue of Israel, life in Israel in the 1950s and 60s, I think we should never forget that life was pretty difficult, especially for Jews from Greece. Pretty tough. If one listens, reads, works with testimonies in Hebrew of Jews from Greece, it's very painful to listen to. So Israel in the 1950s and 1960s, it was not the paradise. It was not a paradise. Life was extremely difficult, especially for the Jews from Greece, the Greek Jews.
Why would it be more difficult for Greeks?
Because we were Sephardic, the majority of us Ashkenazi.
Oh, that's good. That's it.
Okay, on that painful note, I think it's time to.
I think Kateřina wanted to add something.
Okay.
Oh, maybe just to the migration. I think that the broken expectation of the homecoming and the fear of the looming war made several people to leave not only to Israel or United States, but also to South America or to Eastern Bloc countries. Several of them are going away with the pedomazomide identified 3 families. And I'm sure there are more, maybe they just did not consent to their Jewish identity anymore, be it in Eastern Bloc. One family I know by name doesn't want to speak at all, and they are saying our Jewishness is not what defines us. But there were people who went to those countries, and then again, when the system changed here, or when its system changed, the political system changed in the other country, they deliberately decided either to go back to Greece or to change to another country. This is very much true for South America and all the juntas around South America, but this is also true for the Eastern Bloc countries. Like Moses Purwa would be one of the interesting examples of mobility after the World War II.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Kateřina. Thank you very much, Eleni. I'd like also to thank our audience for their patience. And
Very nice to hear.
well, let's move on.